She heard the Alpha King say, "Execute her," and felt the bond lock in. The morning fog rolled over the jagged cliffs of Carithia, hiding the castle's blackened towers from the distant village below. The wind whispered across the crumbled stones of the ancient courtyard, carrying with it the scent of smoke and frost. Even the sun seemed afraid to rise fully, casting only a dim silver light over the kingdom. Alara's hands were bound behind her, the rough rope biting into her wrists as she was dragged along the cobblestones. Her heart hammered, not from fear alone, but from the strange pull that had begun in her chest, a fluttering she could not name. Villagers lined the streets, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Some whispered her name, some spat, and some trembled, sensing that she was different. The gates of the castle loomed above her, carved with grotesque faces that seemed to leer as she passed. She knew this place by stories and warnings, but nothing had prepared her for the oppressive weight of it in person. The walls of Carithia were as cold as the hearts within, and rumors spoke of a king who ruled without mercy. Kale, the Alpha King of the night-bound vampires, awaited her in the throne room. Tall, dark, and unyielding, he stood like a shadow carved from stone. His eyes, sharp and silver under the hood of the throne's shadow, scanned her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Alara's pulse thudded painfully, as if the beat of her heart alone would betray her. "You dare to enter my kingdom uninvited." Kale's voice rang through the hall, low and commanding. The words themselves seemed to carry weight, bending the light and cold around him. Every noble and guard in the chamber fell silent, their gazes fixed on the girl who had been brought before the Alpha King. I meant no harm," Alara stammered, her voice shaking but carrying a hint of defiance. Baali's gaze did not soften. He studied her as one might study a dangerous bird trapped in a cage. "Refuge?" His tone was amused, but there was no kindness in it. "You trespass in my lands, and you do so carrying the mark of the cursed blood." At that, a shiver ran down Alara's spine. She had always been told her bloodline was cursed, an ancient mark left by a forgotten war between humans and the night creatures. She had never felt it, never believed it, until now, standing in the chamber with the king himself. The courtiers murmured among themselves, eyes darting between Kale and Alara. A faint pulse of magic seemed to hum in the air, unnoticed by most but tangible to her. She could feel it creeping along her veins, a quiet vibration that made her head spin and her chest tighten. Something was happening, something old and dangerous. Kale stepped forward, his presence so immense that the shadows seemed to lean away from him. "Guards," he said, voice like iron, "execute her!" The words fell like a hammer. The rope binding her wrists tightened, as if in response to his command. Alara froze, but then something extraordinary happened. A warm, aching pull surged through her chest, radiating outward like fire and ice at the same time. Her vision blurred, and for a fleeting second she saw not the king's command, but his soul laid bare. Pain, fury, and a deep, lonely hunger for something he did not yet understand. She realized with a shock that the moment his words fell, something invisible had connected them. Kale froze mid-step, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic face. His silver eyes widened just slightly, catching the faint glow that now traced along Alara's skin. The court whispered in alarm, sensing the unnatural energy growing between them. The executioner hesitated, gripping the cold steel blade, his breath caught in his throat. The air around Alara shimmered, vibrating with tension. A single heartbeat stretched into an eternity as the king's voice fell silent, leaving the chamber suspended in uncertainty. "What is this?" Kale finally murmured, more to himself than anyone else. His usual command faltered, and for the first time a shadow of hesitation touched him. Alara's legs shook. She felt the bond that had formed, an invisible tether linking her very life to his. She could feel his strength, his anger, and something else, something she could not name but felt deeply. Her fear mingled with fascination, and a strange certainty settled in her mind. She could not escape him now, and perhaps she did not want to. The executioner, sensing the shift in power, slowly lowered the blade. The room remained silent, tense as a drawn bowstring. Cale's eyes did not leave hers, and she could swear she felt him thinking, feeling, questioning. "You should be dead," he said finally, his voice quiet but dangerous. "And yet you breathe. Tell me, what trick is this?" "No trick," Elara whispered, her own voice trembling. I don't know. I only know I—" Her words faltered as the energy of the bond pulsed stronger, as if alive. It seemed to answer to both of them, not just her fear or his will. Cale's jaw tightened. He reached out a hand not to strike but instinctively, and the moment his fingers hovered over the rope binding her wrists, a spark shot through the air. The rope fell away as if melted by unseen heat, and Elara stumbled back, her heart racing. The court gasped. Some whispered that the bond between them was a curse long forgotten, one that could tie human and vampire in ways that defied nature. Others looked at Cale with fear, seeing for the first time that even the Alpha King could be shaken. Cale's voice broke the spell, low and steady, carrying a weight no one dared question. "Guards, leave us!" One by one, the soldiers backed away, the sound of boots echoing against the stone floors fading into silence. The chamber seemed emptier now, as if the walls themselves had drawn back to watch the bond form between the king and the human girl. Elara's legs quivered under her, but she stood tall. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Cale's silver eyes pierced hers. "I want to understand why the bond exists." "Why you exist." His tone was cold, but not cruel. Beneath the frost, there was something else, a flicker of curiosity, of longing. She wanted to speak, to protest, to tell him she did not belong here. But the bond tightened, and she felt the truth in a visceral, inescapable way. They were connected now. Her life and his power were intertwined, and neither could deny it. He circled her slowly, studying her as a predator studies prey, though there was no cruelty in his gaze, only calculation, curiosity, and something that whispered of buried longing. "You will remain in the castle," Kyle finally said. "Not as my prisoner, yet not as my guest either. You will learn to obey the bond, or it will destroy you." Elara swallowed hard, the words echoing in her mind. She had been brought here to die, and yet she was not dead. The bond had chosen her. The Alpha King had unknowingly bound their fates together. For the first time, Elara noticed the shadows clinging to the corners of the chamber. They writhed like living things, reacting to the bond as if it were a beacon in the dark. She shivered, feeling both fear and exhilaration. The world she knew had ended the moment Cale said, "Execute her!" and a new, dangerous world had begun. She wanted to ask him why, wanted to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. The bond thrummed inside her chest like a heartbeat of its own, and she realized with a sinking certainty she could not escape. Desk. Not now. Not ever. Cale turned back to the throne, sitting down with a measured calm that hid the storm beneath. He did not look at her as one looks at a prisoner, nor as one looks at a guest. He looked at her as one looks at destiny, complicated, untamed, and unavoidable. Elara felt her stomach twist. What had begun as fear had become something more, something terrifyingly magnetic. The Alpha King had pronounced her death, and yet here she was, alive and inexplicably bound to him. As the sun finally pierced the fog outside, casting pale light across the marble floors, Elara knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed forever. And so had his. The bond had locked in. And with it, their fates were sealed. The castle of Carithia was alive in ways Elara had not imagined. Its stone walls seemed to breathe, ancient cracks whispering secrets of battles long past. Breeze. Candles flickered in the hallways like tiny stars trapped in glass, casting shadows that twisted and stretched like living things. The air was heavy with the scent of iron, wax, and something faintly floral, a trace of Cale's presence that seemed to linger even when he was not near. Elara walked through the corridors, her hands still trembling from the bond's sudden awakening. Though the ropes that had bound her wrists had vanished, the connection between her and Cale remained, pulsing like a hidden heartbeat. Every step she took made her feel both stronger and more vulnerable, as if the Alpha King's presence was stitched into her very veins. Cale followed silently behind her, his cloak brushing the floor, the sound barely more than a whisper. He said nothing, though she could sense him watching her every movement, every breath. Elara could feel his power pressing at the edges of her mind, an invisible weight that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked, her voice small but steady. She dared not turn to look at him directly. Cale did not answer immediately. He stopped at a landing, his gaze sweeping the grand hall before fixing on her again. "The bond," he said finally, voice low and measured. "It is not common, Rask, rare, dangerous. It chooses without permission." Elara swallowed hard. "I didn't choose it." "No," Cale said, his silver eyes reflecting candlelight. "But it chose you, and in choosing you, it binds me as well." The words weighed heavily on her. To be bound to Cale meant more than fear or obedience. It meant sharing his strength, his power, his destiny. But it also meant sharing his pain, his anger, and perhaps his darkness. The first night in the castle was colder than she had imagined. The room given to her was simple, yet elegant, stone walls softened by a thick carpet, a single window opening onto the fog-laden cliffs. Despite the warmth of the hearth, Elara shivered, partly from the chill, partly from the presence she could not shake. Cale visited her at night. He did not knock, did not announce himself. One moment the room was empty, the next he was there, standing at the foot of her bed, like a shadow that had stepped from the walls. "You cannot sleep," he observed, his voice a quiet rumble. "I try," she whispered, looking down at her hands, feeling the bond pulse faintly. "It's difficult." Cale stepped closer, the faint scent of winter pine and iron surrounding him. "It will be difficult," he said, "because the bond is not merely a chain, it is a mirror. It will show you parts of me you do not want to see, and parts of yourself you are not ready to face." Elara lifted her eyes to meet his. "And if I fail," he hesitated, "then it may destroy us both." The fear in his words sent a shiver through her, yet beneath it stirred something more, a strange exhilaration. She was no longer merely a human girl caught in a predator's world. She was part of a power that demanded respect, control, and understanding. And Cale, for all his dominance, was tethered to her now in ways even he could not ignore. Days passed, and the castle seemed to test her. Each corridor carried subtle threats, enchanted statues whose eyes glimmered when she passed, doors that creaked open to reveal rooms empty yet heavy with whispers. The bond pulsed in response, warning her, guiding her, sometimes overwhelming her. Cale remained distant, yet ever present. He was a constant shadow, watching, studying, sometimes speaking in clipped, measured tones. "You must learn the limits," he said once as she stumbled near a balcony overlooking the cliffs. "Power without control is death." "I don't even know how to control it," she said, frustration and fear mingling in her voice. "You will," he replied simply, "if you survive." Survival became a shared goal, though neither admitted it aloud. They trained together in the courtyard, a space where the bond could be tested without risk of harm to the castle or its inhabitants. Kale's control over his abilities was absolute. His movements were precise, his strikes lethal. Alara learned quickly that she could feel the echo of his power, the way his energy shifted with each gesture. She mirrored it, awkwardly at first, but the bond strengthened her, letting her anticipate his next move in ways that startled them both. With the training came tension. Each movement carried unspoken challenges. Kale expected obedience, and Alara fought for independence. Every clash was both physical and emotional, a test of will, a dance of control. The bond amplified their emotions, and sometimes frustration flared into anger, anger into longing, longing into fear. One evening the castle trembled with distant thunder, though the sky above remained clear. Kale had returned from a council with his generals, and the castle felt heavier, charged. Elara sensed the shift immediately. The bond quivered, pulling her toward him even as she resisted. "You are thinking too much," Kale said, appearing beside her in the hall.
"The bond feeds on hesitation. Trust yourself, or it will punish you."
"I do trust myself," she replied, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue.
"No," he said softly, but firmly. "You trust your fear, and fear is dangerous. Especially here." Before she could respond, a shadow flickered across the far wall. Instinctively, she felt the bond flare, a sudden warning. Kale's eyes narrowed, and in an instant, he had moved, positioning himself between her and the unseen threat, brushed hers. Brief, accidental, and a shock of heat ran up her arm. The bond pulsed stronger, reacting to danger, linking them closer than before. "You feel it," Kale said, his voice low, almost a growl. "It will not let us ignore each other when danger comes." Elara nodded, swallowing hard, the pulse in her chest echoing in her ears. She realized with dawning horror and fascination that the bond was not passive. It lived, breathed, and acted with its own intent. That night, sleep was impossible. She lay awake, listening to the wind howling outside, feeling Kale's presence, even in the absence of his figure. Memories that were not entirely her own flitted through her mind, visions of battles, of losses, of a man bound by duty and regret. Each vision left her trembling, yet each also drew her closer to understanding him, to understanding the bond. Days became a blur of lessons, training, and silent observation. Kale was a master of restraint, yet occasionally glimpses of vulnerability slipped through, moments when he allowed himself to smile faintly, or when his eyes softened, watching her as she trained or explored the castle halls. Those moments made her heart ache with something she could not name, something forbidden yet undeniable. Then came the first attack. A messenger arrived at dawn, riding a black stallion, his cloak torn and muddy. "My king," he gasped, bowing. "The rival clans. They know. They know about the bond. They march tonight." Guards scrambled, banners fluttered, and Kale's expression hardened into steel. Elara felt the bond tighten violently, a silent scream echoing through her chest. Danger was coming, and the bond demanded she face it with him. "You will stay inside," Kale said, though the words lacked conviction. His eyes lingered on her, measuring, calculating, yet something in them betrayed hesitation. No human has ever faced what is coming and survived. "I will not hide," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I am bound to you. I will fight." Kyle's jaw tightened, and for the first time he seemed uncertain. The bond pulsed between them, urging, warning, pleading. He knew she could not be left behind, and he could not take her with him without risk. As night fell, the castle braced for the assault. Torches flared along the walls, shadows danced, and the wind carried the sound of distant drums, an ominous heartbeat that matched her own. Elara stood on the battlements, feeling Kale's power ripple through her, lending strength and clarity. "I will protect you," Kale said quietly, as he stepped beside her. "But the bond, it chooses what it will." "I am ready," she replied, though her hands shook. The first clash of steel echoed across the courtyard, and the night erupted into chaos. Elara felt the bond flare, overwhelming, guiding, and terrifying. Every step she took, every breath, every heartbeat was linked to Kael's. She realized in a flash their survival depended not only on skill but on trust, understanding, and surrender to the bond. And in that moment, as firelight reflected in their eyes, Elara understood the truth of the Alpha King's warning. The bond would not only protect them, but it could consume them, if either faltered. The castle of Carithia was silent in the aftermath of the night's assault. Torches burned low, casting long, trembling shadows along the corridors. The distant cries of the wounded and the groans of fallen warriors echoed faintly, a reminder that survival had come at a cost. Elara sat on the edge of her chamber bed, hands pressed against her knees, feeling the bond pulse steadily between her and Kale. Heather. It had grown deeper, more insistent, as if guiding her through something neither of them fully understood. Kale entered quietly, his steps silent on the stone floor. But his cloak hung loosely, edges singed from the battle, and his expression was unreadable. Elara could feel his exhaustion, his tension, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like the castle stones themselves. "You should not be here," Kale said softly, though his voice lacked its usual steel. "You need rest." "I can't," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. "The bond, it pulls me. I feel everything you felt during the battle." "I can't ignore it." Kale's silver eyes softened, flickering with a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Then you will learn, as I have, that the bond is a gift and a curse. It shows truth, it reveals weakness, and it demands honesty, even when you fear it."
Elara's chest tightened.
The bond had already shown her glimpses of Kale's past, moments of sorrow and regret that were not easily shared, memories of a queen he had loved and lost, decisions made in fire and blood that had left scars on his soul. Bond did more than link them. It revealed the parts of him he could not hide, and the parts of herself she had been too afraid to acknowledge. Days passed in a tense rhythm. The castle repaired its walls, and the survivors tended to their wounds, but the undercurrent of unease never faded. Elara trained alongside Kale, learning to control her reactions to the bond, to sense danger before it arrived, and to move with the precision the Alpha King demanded. Their relationship evolved in quiet, imperceptible ways. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been dragged to the throne room. She was strong, capable, and fiercely alive.
Yet Kael remained a mystery.
There were moments when he softened, allowed a faint smile, or watched her with unguarded attention. But always, he maintained the distance of a king, reminding her that trust was earned, not given. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Kale led her to the castle library, a vast chamber filled with ancient tomes, maps, and scrolls. The smell of old parchment and candle wax was comforting. "You must understand the bond," Kale said, running a hand along the spine of a massive book. "It is older than my family, older than this castle." It was forged in blood and magic, in a time when humans and vampires fought for dominance. Those who bear it are chosen, bound to power greater than themselves. They are never free from its influence. Elara listened, absorbing his words.
"And my family? The curse I carry?"
"Does it make me dangerous?" Kale's gaze softened. dark silver eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "Dangerous to me," he said quietly, "but it makes you unpredictable, and the world fears what it cannot control." She felt a sting of sadness. "I never asked for this." "You did not choose it," Kale said, stepping closer. "But you will decide how you use it. That choice is yours alone." The moment stretched, charged, with unspoken tension. For the first time, Elara allowed herself to step closer, to feel the bond thrum stronger between them. She could sense his heartbeat, steady yet burdened, and it called to something deep within her. She wanted to speak, to ask him to trust her, to let the walls between them fall, but the weight of the past, of duty, kept her silent. The castle trembled that night, not from wind or storm, but from betrayal. A whisper had found its way to them, a revelation that shook the foundation of trust. A rival clan pretending to be allies had infiltrated the castle during repairs, spreading lies that Kale's leadership had been weakened by the bond. Their spies suggested that the Alpha King had chosen to favor a human girl over his own clan. A weakness, they claimed, that could be exploited. Kael's fury was silent but lethal. Elara felt it through the bond, a wave of restrained anger and hurt that threatened to consume him. "They will pay," he whispered, voice low, a promise that carried weight and menace.
"And anyone who betrays me will not survive."
Elara's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to assure him of her loyalty, but the bond pulsed fiercely, warning her to remain calm.
The Alpha King's pain was hers to feel, but his vengeance was something she could not influence. The next days were filled with preparation. Guards doubled their patrols, enchantments shimmered along the castle walls, and Kale's attention to Elara became both protective and demanding. Every glance, every touch, every word carried layers of unspoken meaning. She could sense his trust growing slowly, cautiously, yet mingled with doubt and pride. One night, Elara wandered the outer halls, drawn by a feeling she could not name. The bond pulsed urgently, and she felt the presence of someone, or something, hidden in the shadows. Her hand hovered over the hilt of a small dagger she had been allowed to keep for training. "You are not alone," a voice said from the darkness, smooth and mocking. Elara spun, dagger raised. A figure stepped forward, a warrior from the rival clan, eyes gleaming with ambition and malice. "You cannot fight him," the warrior said, smirking. "The Alpha King's bond with you makes him distracted, vulnerable. You cannot survive this night." Elara's pulse quickened, but she felt the bond flare in response. Kale's presence, even when distant, surged within her, guiding her movements, lending her strength. She dodged, moved, and struck with precision she had not known she possessed before. The fight was brief, intense, and illuminated by torchlight. The warrior fled, leaving her panting, hands trembling, yet alive. She sank to her knees, feeling the bond pulse violently, warning her, comforting her, claiming her as its own. Kale appeared then, silent as the shadows, his expression unreadable. "You survived," he said, voice low, almost approving. I think I did," she said, struggling to catch her breath. He knelt beside her, silver eyes locking on hers. "You are stronger than you know," he said softly. "The bond, it chose well, but it will demand more, always more." For the first time, Elara felt something like hope mingled with fear. The bond was not merely a curse or a chain. It was a guide, a teacher, a mirror of the soul, and it had chosen her to walk a path beside the Alpha King, a path fraught with danger, mystery, and perhaps redemption. The next morning, the castle stirred with the aftermath of the confrontation. Guards whispered, servants gossiped, and the halls carried the tension of secrets half revealed. Elara trained again, her movements more confident, her senses sharper. Kael observed, offering guidance, corrections, and the occasional rare smile. "You are learning," he said as she completed a complex maneuver, the bond pulsing in harmony with her heartbeat. "But never forget, strength without control is worthless, and the bond will test you, always." She was not just learning to fight. She was learning to understand Kael, to navigate the intricate currents of power, trust, and destiny that the bond had unleashed. The peace was shattered by a messenger who arrived at midday, cloaked and masked, bearing a single message sealed with a dark sigil. Kael broke the seal, reading silently, his expression darkening with each word. "They know the bond is awake," he said finally, voice low and tense. "They know what it can do, and they will come for it. And for us." Elara felt the bond flare, an urgent, vibrating pulse that echoed through her chest. Danger was coming again, greater than before. But this time, she would not cower. This time she would meet it head-on, side by side with Kael. For the first time, she understood the truth of the Alpha King's existence. Not a solitary ruler, but a man bound to destiny, haunted by past sins, and capable of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The bond had revealed more than his power. It had revealed his heart. As night fell, they stood together on the castle battlements, gazing out at the dark horizon. The wind tugged at their cloaks. The moon cast a silver glow over the cliffs, and the bond thrummed like a living thing between them. "Whatever comes," Kael said quietly, voice carrying the weight of command and vulnerability, "we face it together. The bond will guide us, or it will consume us."
Elara nodded, feeling the pulse within her, steadying her, claiming her.
She would not run. She would not falter. The bond had chosen them both, and she would honor it, whatever the cost. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon, casting the Carethia castle in a pale, cold glow. Battle still rose in faint wisps from the outer walls, and the distant cries of those who survived mingled with the wind. Elara stood on the battlements, the bond thrumming in her chest like a living heartbeat. Every pulse carried Kael's presence, his strength, his fear, his hope. Kael appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. His cloak was torn, but his posture was unwavering, a silent testament to the trials they had faced. Silver eyes met hers, and for the first time since she had been brought to the castle, there was no distance between them. Not in spirit, not in the bond. "They are coming," Kael said, voice low but resolute. "They will not stop until the bond is broken or one of us falls. And this time, they bring more than warriors. They bring power." Elara's stomach twisted, but the fear she had felt before was tempered by determination. She had trained, learned, and endured. The bond had taught her to feel Kael's strength as her own, to anticipate danger, to trust herself even when doubt whispered. "I'm ready," she said quietly, placing a hand on the cold stone railing. "We face it together." Kyle nodded. "Together," he echoed, the single word carrying centuries of pride, pain, and now, trust. The castle gates shook as the rival clans arrived, their war horns piercing the still morning air. Torches flared along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like predators. The sound of marching feet was a drumbeat of inevitability, echoing through the castle as though the world itself awaited the clash. Elara felt the bond tighten, warning her of every shift in the energy around her. Kael's presence was a steady current beneath her skin, guiding her movements, lending clarity amid chaos. They did not need words. The bond connected their thoughts, their instincts, and their strength. The first wave of attackers reached the castle's outer courtyard. Guards met them with shields and swords, but Alara and Kale remained above, watching, waiting, feeling the bond pulse as if alive.
You must stay close to me, Kale instructed, his hand brushing hers briefly.
The touch sent a shiver of warmth through her chest, and the bond responded, vibrating with urgency and anticipation. "I will," she whispered. The enemy scaled the walls, breaking through magical barriers meant to hold them at bay. Alara's heart pounded as the bond flared, and she stepped forward, her own strength surging in harmony with Kale's. Together they moved like shadow and storm, a dance of power and precision. Alara struck with newfound confidence, her movements guided by Kale's instinct. The bond pulsed with every blow, teaching her, warning her, connecting her to the rhythm of the battle. Kale fought beside her, his silver eyes sharp, his strikes lethal, yet tempered by his desire to protect her. Amid the chaos, a shadow moved silently along the edge of the battlements, a figure unseen by most, yet familiar to the bond. Alara felt the pulse of danger spike, a violent flare that made her chest ache. She recognized the presence instantly. The spy from the rival clan who had infiltrated the castle before. Kale's gaze followed hers. "I see it," he said, voice a quiet growl. Now. Alara's legs moved of their own accord. Guided by the bond, she met the spy in the shadows, the clash of steel ringing through the courtyard. The fight was intense, each movement sharp and precise, but the bond pulsed stronger with every moment, lending her courage, focus, and strength beyond what she thought possible. She struck decisively, disarming the spy and forcing them to retreat. But even as the threat withdrew, a new wave of attackers surged forward, more determined, more ruthless than before. The rival clans had learned the castle's defenses, and the bond could not be ignored. Kal moved beside her, eyes scanning the battlefield. "We cannot hold them for long," he said, the tension in his voice sharp. "The bond has awakened something in them, something dangerous." Alara nodded, the bond thrumming in agreement. "Then we end this now." Together, picked up, carrying the scent of blood, fire, and iron. Shadows flickered along the walls as the attackers pressed closer. Kale and Alara stood back to back, moving in perfect synchrony, each anticipating the other's actions through the bond. Every strike, every dodge, every movement was connected, a symphony of power that neither could achieve alone. Then came the figure leading the assault. The warlord of the rival clan, a towering figure wreathed in dark energy. Alara felt the bond flare violently, warning her that this battle would test them like never before. Day. Kale's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his sword. "This is it," he said quietly, "just for her. Whatever happens, we face it as one." Pulse quickened.
"One!"
she echoed, her own grip steadying. The battle that followed was a storm of steel and shadow. The warlord moved with unnatural speed, striking with precision and force that tested even Kale's skill. Alara felt every strike, every shift in energy, through the bond, guiding her movements, lending strength and warning of danger. Together they moved as one, a seamless force against the chaos. But even as they fought, the bond demanded more. Alara felt it drawing deeper from her, pulling on her energy, her courage, her very life force. Bond. She realized that the bond was not merely a connection. It was a test, a trial of trust, courage, and surrender.
"You are holding back," Kale said sharply, voice carrying over the clash of battle.
His eyes met hers, silver and unyielding. "Trust it, desk. Trust me." Alara inhaled sharply, feeling the pulse of the bond surge. She released her fear, her hesitation, her doubts, and allowed the bond to guide her fully. Power surged through her, radiant and fierce, flowing from Kale through her and back again. breaths, she moved with clarity, strength, and precision, striking down the warlord's warriors with a fluid grace that left even Kale momentarily breathless. The final confrontation came swiftly. The warlord stood before Kale and Alara, dark energy swirling around him like a storm. Kale raised his sword, and Alara moved beside him, the bond flaring, uniting their strength. "Now," Kale said, voice steady. Together they struck. The force of their combined power shattered the warlord's defenses. With a final decisive blow, he fell, defeated, the dark energy dissipating into the night. Silence fell across the courtyard, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Alara sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her, but the bond pulsed warmly, steady, claiming her as its own. Kale stood beside her, breathing heavily, his silver eyes soft as they met hers. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it."
"I felt you,"
she said, voice trembling.
"The bond, it guided me."
"I could feel you. Every step, every movement." Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "And I felt you," he said, voice low, carrying something more than pride. "The bond, it is stronger than I imagined. Stronger than fear. Stronger than anger. It is us." The wind carried a quiet stillness, as if the castle itself breathed a sigh of relief. The battle was over, but the bond remained steady, pulsing with the promise of what had been forged in fire and fear. In the days that followed, the castle recovered, the walls were repaired, the wounded tended, and the whispers of the bond spread quietly through the halls. Kale no longer treated Alara as merely a human under his protection. She was his equal in strength, in courage, and in purpose. The bond had tested them both, and they had survived, stronger and closer than before. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Kale and Alara stood on the highest battlement, gazing out at the horizon. "The bond. It is ours," Kale said, voice soft, carrying the weight of centuries. "No one can break it, and no one can claim it. It is ours because we chose to endure it, to understand it, and to trust it, and each other." Alara nodded, feeling the pulse of the bond steady and warm. "I trust it," she said. "I trust you." Kale's eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself a full smile. "Then we are no longer bound by fear," he said. "We are bound by choice. And that is stronger than any curse, any enemy, any power." The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of the sea and the cliffs below. A castle, once a place of fear and power, now felt like home. The bond that had begun with a word of death had grown into a connection of trust, strength, and hope. Pulse in harmony with her heartbeat, steady, unyielding, alive. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would always be challenges, threats, and darkness. But she also knew that with Kale by her side and the bond between them, they could face anything. And for the first time she believed that destiny was not a chain to bind them, but a path they could walk together, forged in fire, tempered by trials and sealed by trust.